Right, so there we are. So I'd like to welcome all of you to the San Anselmo Public Library Evening Book Group. And it's a very extra special book group because the book we all read was The Daughters of Edward Darley Boit by Sara Loyster, who is my predecessor as the library director here at the town of San Anselmo Public Library. So I'm very happy that you're all here. Thank you for joining us this evening, and especially thank you to Sara for joining us. And I'd like to pass this on to Lindsay McLord, who is going to introduce Sara to all of us.
And Sara obviously hardly needs introduction to this crew, but I did take some cues from Sara and a little research, and so I have some prepared remarks. It's a great pleasure to welcome Sara Loyster back to the San Anselmo Library Book Group. As many of you will fondly recall, Sara was our public library director from 1997 to 2010. One of Sara's lasting legacies in our town is the fact that we passed the first library parcel tax in June 2010, which provided for expanded hours and staffing, making our library more accessible to all. Many of us recall with gratitude how instrumental Sara, along with Cindy Barrows, Suzanne Connect, Renee, and many more people than I can name, were in that successful effort. Sara's early roots are in the Midwest, where she was the third of four daughters, oddly enough. Her mother instilled a love of art in Sara and her sisters from an early age, with frequent visits to the Chicago Art Institute. Sara majored in English and creative writing at the University of Wisconsin, where she benefited from a writing class taught by Nobel Prize winner Isaac Bashevis Singer. Did I say that right, Sara?
Yes.
Writing has been a constant in Sara's life, library career, for which she prepared by earning her MLS at UC Berkeley. Prior to her tenure here in San Anselmo, Sara worked in Contra Costa County libraries for 26 years as a children's young adult reference librarian and branch manager. Getting back to the really local, Sara started a writing group that included Marianne Schaefer and Julia Popri, two of the founding members of this book group. And for a brief time, Cindy Barrows, who was there to make sure her sister Marianne would stay on task until she decided she could leave because Sara and Julia thought they could do the job without Cindy babysitting. I'm not sure if that's really fair, but I think that was a little bit of that.
Absolutely.
Marianne's The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society emerged in 2008. Co-authored by Annie Barrows, Marianne's niece and Cindy's daughter, when Marianne's illness intervened, Guernsey was tremendously well received. Sara started The Daughters of Edward Darley Boit in 2001 when she was in this writing group. It's exciting to have Sara join us this evening for a lively discussion of her debut novel. And a couple of suggestions before I turn this over to Sara. We have many guests joining us this evening. Please introduce yourselves to the extent you'd like to when you pose questions of Sara or offer your comments. And additionally, because there are more of us than usual, feel free to use the chat feature, and Linda and I will monitor the chat and pass those remarks onward as time presents itself. So with that, let's hear from Sara. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I'm really happy to be doing this in my very familiar group of people. I mean, I was part of the book discussion group from the moment I hit the ground and as town librarian. I was swooped up by Cindy, who was in charge of the book group, and we held it in the library around the big table, which I'm sure you guys were doing before the COVID hit. And it was always an incredibly, it was a highlight of my time as librarian. I loved those groups, and the characters, as some of you will remember, Marianne and Julia and Cindy. I mean, they just kept us in stitches the whole time. So it was a wonderful, wonderful way to get engaged with the community, being part of that group. So this feels really like something that just was meant to be, that I would come back and present my book, because my book really was born in the library. We actually met in the basement after hours. It's Julia and Marianne and I, and sometimes we met at our houses, but often we met at the library. So we were working away at our little individual projects, and Marianne Schaefer's book went on to be a huge bestseller. I'm sure many of you have read it, and was made into a lovely movie. But my book is probably not going to follow that course. But nevertheless, it seems to be getting out there in the world, and I'm happy that people are reading it. And this evening is really fun for me, because this is the first time I have spoken to a group of people who have all read the book. I mean, most of you, I'm sure, have read the book. So other speaking engagements I have had to be careful not to spoil the plot surprises, because a lot of the people there were just being introduced to the book and hadn't read it yet. So this is going to be fun, because there are no, I can just talk about everything. We can talk about everything. We don't have to worry about spoiling the ending for anybody. So I'm looking forward to hearing your reactions to the story and hearing your questions. So we should just get started. Anybody?
I'd like to start. Just thank you for including me in this evening. I totally appreciate it. My name's Tracy Tandy.
And Tracy is also an author, I should point out.
Did you say your name again? I couldn't catch it. Teresa,
Tracy,
what?
Tracy. Yeah.
Okay.
And I used to work at the library, but I wanted to say, Sarah, congratulations. 20 years of work on a book.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Put some time off.
Yeah, but it's fantastic. It's the best job in the world, but it's one of the hardest. And I just want to commend you for keeping going, and congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Anybody else?
Hi,
I would like to hear, did you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
I would like to hear some of the things that, like inspired you. There's some, major themes in the book, and, for instance, time travel. I mean, what inspired you to write about time travel, and your personal relationship with that particular painting, and there was also the role of the I'm forgetting the author of Alice in Wonderland, but some of the major themes.
Carroll, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so if there's any of that you would like to elaborate on, I would love to hear some of your sources of inspiration.
Okay, well, I should say that what happened to Victoria in the story actually happened to me. So I was in Boston, and I have always been a person who goes to art museums. I love art. As I think Lindsay mentioned, my mother took us to the Chicago Art Institute when I was a kid. And I would always fall in love with one painting or another. And I would just stand in front of it and kind of be spellbound and imagine myself in the painting, or, try to figure out the story of the painting. And I particularly liked portraits, because you could think a lot about the person. So I was at the MFA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and I went into the Sargent Gallery, and I walked into the gallery, and this painting is enormous. It's 7 feet by 7 feet.
Oh, wow.
And it dominates one whole wall of the gallery. And so the figures in the painting are almost life-sized. So you have this impression that you could almost, as you're coming up to it, you could almost walk into this room and, be there with those girls. So I was, I'm also a great aficionado of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So the idea of walking through the back of the cupboard and into Narnia and this whole magical land has always appealed to me. So as I'm standing there looking at this painting, and I'm thinking, why would he choose to paint these girls in this particular way? It's a very unique portrait. I mean, it's not your usual kind of portrait. They're in this huge room. It's very dark, and they're all kind of separated in space, and they're not looking at one another. They're just kind of individual girls in this room, and there are these two giant ceramic vases, which are there in the painting. And in fact, those same vases stand sentry in the museum right next to the painting on either side, and they're probably 6-7 feet tall, so they're huge. So they're very impressive as well. Anyway, so I'm standing there thinking, I didn't know what to think about the choices that the artist had made, and I was very intrigued by them. The only thing I actually knew about the painting prior to seeing it was I had seen a segment of Sister Wendy's American Art. I don't know if any of you watched that on PBS, but I used to love her interpretations of art. She was always a little bit quirky. And she had talked about this painting at some length on that show. And she'd mentioned that 2 of the girls had mental illness. And so I'm standing, and that's all I could remember really about the painting from the Sister Wendy show, that 2 of them were mentally ill. So that was intriguing. And I was thinking, okay, which ones? And it seemed pretty clear that it had to be those 2 back in the shadows who were just kind of lurking back there. And so anyway, that was my inspiration. I thought I could walk into this painting and find out what's going on with these girls. And I had no idea. So I went home and I went to my book group and I said, I think I have an idea for a new book. I had been working on something else, and I said, this is what I'm going to do. And so it just kind of evolved from there. I had to figure out what was going on, and that was my next job. So I think that's where I went down the rabbit hole with Lewis Carroll and the sexual predator kind of a subject matter, because something was obviously wrong in the Boit family. And then I did a whole bunch of research. So I could just keep talking, but does somebody else want to ask a question or a sort of a follow-up here?
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure I answered all of your questions, but that was sort of the impetus for getting going.
That was the main one. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love to follow up with some of your research. It sounded like you did a lot of wonderful traveling too.
Yes, I did. I did a deep dive into Sargent and, tried to find out everything I could about Sargent. I went back to Boston a year later and went to the library and did a lot of research there. But I was really kind of hitting a dead end as far as the Boit family was concerned. There wasn't a whole lot written about them. There were little snippets here and there. But the father was a painter, and so there was stuff about him, but there wasn't really a lot about the girls themselves, except I did learn that none of them married, and the 2 elder ones had suffered from mental illness, but I didn't get a lot of detail. So I kept searching and searching. And then finally and I had to, actually my last years in the library were very stressful years, as some of you will remember. We had the flood, and then we had the staff layoffs, and then we worked on the parcel tax. And it was a crazy time from about 2005 till 2010. So the book took a back seat for a while. But then I retired, and the other wonderful thing that happened in 2010 was a book called Sargent's Daughters, The Biography of a Painting, was written by a woman named Erica Hirschler, Dr. Erica Hirschler, who is a curator at the MFA. And she had been studying Sargent her whole life, and she made a project of finding out about the painting and about the Boits. And she'd gone over to Italy and France and, dug out all of these letters and archives. It was an astounding bit of digging into the background of the painting. And it was just exactly what I needed. So that was a huge gift. And I incorporated a lot of her research into my book. It was really important to me to be accurate, absolutely true to the facts as they were known in terms of both Sargent's characters and the girls themselves, all the Boit family. So you'll see things in the book that are actual, little snippets from diaries and letters and so forth that were straight out of Erica Hirschler's book. And then I sent it to her when I finished. And it was really important to me that she kind of gave it her blessing. And it turned out that I wanted to get a blurb from her to be on the cover of the book, which in fact is there. If you guys have the book, you can turn it over and look on the back. And anyway, she was flying off to Australia. Oh, we'd had some this is interesting. We'd had some communication, and then she kind of just dropped the ball. And I was worried that she just was, not interested. But then she wrote me this really lovely letter saying that she was very sorry, because I kept pursuing it. It was really important to me. She wrote me this lovely email saying that she was so sorry that she hadn't responded to me. Her husband had died of pancreatic cancer, and she had just been in a, complete tailspin. So then she said, oh, but I really do want to read your book. But I'm flying off to Australia. And anyway, the timing was really tight because my publisher was saying, we have to get these blurbs in by X date. I think it was June 1st. And she was on an airplane to Australia. So I said, is there any way, can you just write a couple sentences? That's all I need. But she was determined to read the book first. She wasn't just going to, So she read it on the plane coming back. She said she was on the plane for 26 hours and she was completely jet lagged, but she read the book and then she sent me this blurb the next day. And I was just so grateful. It was wonderful. So, and she liked it. So I think the research paid off. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Anybody else?
Well, Sarah, I just want to say congratulations. I'm so happy for you. I know how much this means. Us librarians, we really like it when we can talk to the author and find out the thought process and really have a connection with the author to the book. It was fantastic. I'm not all the way finished.
Oh, then we spoil some surprises for you.
That's okay. But I'm totally enjoying it. And since I've been to Boston many times, my youngest went to school there. It's wonderful to visualize all the places you talk about, especially the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which I absolutely love. So great to see all of you. But Sarah, we're really proud.
Thank you.
So glad. So happy for you. And getting a Kirkus review is pretty exciting, I have to say.
Yeah, it was a good one. It was not bad. And SLJ did a
I saw that. Very nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was personally thrilled by the fact that I could read the book with my iPad next to me so that I could review the pictures as they were being described in it. And then at the end of the book, I find out that you have a website, which would have been easier than my Googling the paintings one at a time. But it was really pretty thrilling to see all of the paintings while you're going through the stories. So
that's good. That was my intention, to make sure that people had a chance to see the paintings. I've made it sort of a pilgrimage to go and see all of the paintings myself. And I have seen all of those paintings. It's, I have become such a fan of Sargent's work through this process. He's just an astounding painter. And when I think it was I think it was the year I retired. My desire was to go over and see at the Tate in London, Carnation, Lily, Lily, Rose, which is one of his just stunningly beautiful paintings. And that was sort of my my retirement present to myself to go and see that painting. But I keep finding them everywhere I go. I was in Washington, D.C. I guess it was a couple years before, the year before COVID hit. And I went to see the painting that he did of his niece that's at the National Gallery. And that is another just exquisite painting. So anyway, do look at my website, saraloyster.com, because they're all there. And it says where they can be found. And they're definitely worth a visit if you get a chance. To
Sarah?
See. Yeah.
I don't know. I must be, Spencer says I'm spatially challenged. I couldn't find the paintings when I went on your website. I just saw the name of the book under it.
Well, I did look. There's some tabs at the top of the of my website.
Oh,
and
well,
if you look at the tabs, there's one called the paintings.
I'm not blind, but I guess I was not looking at the. I'll do it. I went, so I Googled some things. Actually, I heard Erica Hosler. She had something on YouTube. I wasn't looking for it, but she was. There's tons of stuff.
She's a wonderful speaker. Did you?
So I'll go back and listen. Yeah. I was sitting with my husband in the room, and I didn't want to bother him, but I'll go back and listen to some of that.
Yeah.
And then because I was stupid and couldn't hit your thing, I did have. There was another site where they talked about the Lily Rose, Carnation Rose,
Lily Rose
curators from the Tate.
Oh, wonderful!
They had the painting up because they were going to be fixing it and taking it to the National Gallery. So there's a lot of stuff on here. Well, the DeYoung has some good sergeants.
I'm not crazy about the ones at the DeYoung, but they're okay.
Isn't there a woman in a beautiful satin blue dress?
I don't think that's his. I think that is a contemporary of his. What's his? He also painted Isabella Stewart Gardner. So if you go to the Gardner, a Zorn, I think that's a Zorn.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it is. It does look like Sargent, but they had sort of a similar style. And if you go to the Gardner, you'll see the Zorn painting of Isabella and also the one that Sargent did. And you can compare them. So they're interesting.
I was just going to say, well, I just looked on my tablet and there weren't tabs at the top on your site, but there's those two bars for a menu, or they call it a hamburger in the top right.
Oh, interesting.
Click on that, then paintings are
okay. Then I'll look for menu. Okay.
When I look, it's right at the top, so it may appear differently on different people's computers.
Right. This is on a tablet. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, a tablet would be different than a computer. So
I was surprised that he was born in Italy and spent most of his time in Europe. Hardly at all, it seems, in the States.
Henry James wrote an interesting short story called "The Pupil," which I quote from at the beginning.
I'm a big fan of his, but I never heard of that story.
Check out that short story because. It's the story of Sargent's life, his young life. He was, his family traveled all over Europe. They were not particularly wealthy, so they just kept moving. They'd find, we can go here and find a place to stay, and so he and his sisters were raised just as being dragged around Europe, and they learned many languages, and they were.
When you read about the Henry James, it's quoted James is calling Sargent a knockdown insolence of talent. I thought that was sort of good.
Yeah. I have a secret theory that James was very in love with Sargent.
What about Sargent?
Sargent, well, James was quite a bit older, and Sargent was like this 26-year-old wunderkind, great artist who was getting all these accolades, and James was an older fella but he sort of took Sargent under his wing. So
was Sargent a gay, or you don't know? Was
Sargent gay?
Yeah.
I believe so. That's my thought. He apparently did a lot of nude drawings of men that were at the Harvard Museum that weren't really brought to light until after his death. His family donated them. And it kind of leads you to believe that he was very interested in the male form, much more so. I mean, he painted women beautifully.
Yeah.
But always clothed. Almost never. And the men were always painted naked and very seductive. And
Interesting.
And he never married. He was engaged at one point to a young woman. I don't think he really meant to be engaged. I think the mother was very pushy, and she kind of, it was assuming they were engaged, but then he backed off, and that never happened. It's actually a painting that he did of this young woman. It's called, it's Woman with a Rose or something like that. That was his one little brief foray into a relationship with a woman. And he did get a wonderful painting out of it.
I think you portray him as a very kind man who, he's interested in the children, the younger ones especially.
Yeah. That's how he's described in everything I've ever read about him. He was very kind. He was a great conversationalist. He was a great piano player. He was a party giver and just endlessly generous to his friends, but driven to work and to paint. And partly because he needed to make the money, because he was supporting his entire family, his two sisters and his mother. His father died, and then he took over the family, the mother and the two sisters. So he needed to make money, and he loved to paint. So he was lucky that he was successful. So,
Sarah, this is Ann Kane. I wanted to congratulate you also. And I'm delighted to hear that so many people were so thrilled when you came to San Anselmo, because of course I'm on the other side of that. You left, for those of you, I don't know many of you, but I was a colleague of Sarah's at the Contra Costa.
He was my boss.
We were heartsick when Sarah left us, but turns out that it worked out well for you, Sarah, and for San Anselmo. So congratulations. I also wanted to just say that so much of the book was familiar to me in so many ways. You may remember I grew up outside of Boston. I grew up in Newton. Not only that, but we have a family house on Cape Cod, actually in Falmouth.
Really? That's where my son is. Have we talked about this?
I don't know.
We have to talk. I spend a lot of time there.
I know. I realized that from seeing the mention of it in your book.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time at the MFA when I was in high school, of course, and at the Boston Public Library. Not as much time as my parents thought I spent there, because that was the excuse. We're going out to the library tonight, Mom. We're going out to the MFA. But I did in fact spend a lot of time there. And then I went to graduate school at Simmons, which you may know is right next to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum.
Me too.
I spent a lot of time there in my graduate school days. And on top of that, I did a lot of shopping on Newbury Street. Henry James is probably my famous author. Not only that, but Wings of the Dove is my favorite of his work. So
that's great.
There was a lot that was familiar to me about the book, and I loved it for that reason. But I wanted to pick up a little bit on some of the earlier questions about your inspiration, and in particular, I was curious about. I've seen a lot of Sargent's work, and I had some notion that as I was reading the book, that the Madam X thing was true and factual. And you mentioned, doing research and being factual. And I wondered where, and I'm not sure how to ask this, but what the mix is between fact and fiction. I was wondering the whole time, and I hope I don't ruin this for a person who hasn't finished the book yet, but I kept wondering if the photographer, Clifford Graham, You know, is he a real person? And I didn't know until the very end. You say in the very end, but I was wondering the whole time. So I don't know whether it's the magical realism or time travel, but that type of a book, what's the balance between fact and fiction, and how do you decide to bring in a character like Clifford Graham?
Well, that's a wonderful question. Wonderful question. And it's also a big question.
Right.
So I will attempt to answer it. I should just say right at the get-go that there were times when my fiction and the facts that I was uncovering dovetailed so amazingly that I really would get shivers. I mean, I would really literally get shivers, because it was all working together so perfectly that I thought, you know, maybe I didn't make him up. You know, anyway. So I guess my rule of thumb was, let's just do one thing at a time. Time travel. I didn't want to really write a book of fantasy or science fiction. I wanted to have this vehicle of time travel because I wanted to get into both time periods. But I wanted to be done in such a seamless, realistic way that you didn't really have to stop and question why or what or anything about it. It just happened. And I hope I pulled that off.
Mm-hmm. You did.
I really wanted this to be a book of realism, of, you know, so you wouldn't have to do a lot of suspension of disbelief sort of thing. And I wanted it to be historical fiction. So it had to be true to the facts of the time periods and the characters that were real characters. Those all had to be absolutely factual. And I tried not to include anything that would contradict the facts as I found them out. The Clifford Graham character was very much based on Lewis Carroll, though. And I don't know if any of you have really delved into the Lewis Carroll phenomena, but he was a very creepy guy. He really seriously was a creepy guy. And if you read any of the history of the little girls that he befriended, many of the families of these little girls, I mean, they went along with it for a while, and then they tossed him out in his ear because it was just getting too creepy, you know. And he did take these very suggestive pictures of some of the little girls, which didn't come out until after his death. And, you know, then they were discovered and made available to people, and people were shocked. And you know, his whole character was kind of reevaluated. But I interestingly, I hated his story. You know, all of the creepiness of it just didn't appeal to me at all. It was frightening to me as a child. So I think the way that he used and I'm talking about Lewis Carroll now, used his stories that he told to these young girls was a form of grooming. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of horrible to think about for the people who loved his books. But that's how I felt. I mean, there was something just kind of off about it all. And so I did come across a book that talked about this, a nonfiction book. And I also read a fiction book that I've been trying to remember the name of. It had Alice in the title. And I know we owned it at San Anselmo. It's still probably there. But that was a very interesting book, sort of examining what it was like for Alice when she grew up, you know, and she was looking back on this whole experience. So when I was looking around for what was going to be wrong in the Boit girls' life, I had to find a danger for them to overcome. And because I knew something about Lewis Carroll and I knew he was contemporary with that time period, I figured I could bring in a character that was like him. I didn't want to make it him because obviously he and Sargent never met, as far as I know.
Right.
But if I could make it someone like him, then it could work. And the whole idea of having him take a picture of Jane that was going to be echoed in the Madame X picture that just kind of evolved. And then when I started finding these little details, I don't know if you remember this part, but I think it's almost the last chapter. She's reading in a book, and his sergeant's cousin, Curtis, is quoted. A letter of Curtis's is quoted, and he's talking about how after he and Sergeant went down to the opening of the Paris Salon, and they saw Madame X, and people were having very shocked reactions, and they spent the day there basically, and then everyone was, very, very negative about the painting. So Sergeant went home. He was very upset. He went home with his friend, his cousin actually, and they were at his studio, and then all of a sudden, Sergeant rushes out to go see the Boits. This is mentioned in the letter. Mm-hmm. And then he comes back, and at that time, Amélie Gautreau, who is the lady who is Madame X, and her mother have come to the studio, and they're begging him to take the picture out of this, take it out of the salon. It's just, it's an outrage, it's a scandal. And anyway, but so what stopped me in my tracks when I read that was, why did he go see the Boits? It's like, this really happened. This was real life. He stops everything in the middle of this terrible day, and he goes off to see his friends, the Boits. So in my story, he would go there to apologize, to say, I should never have done that, because they're going to see the picture. They're going to see the fallen strap. They're going to remember the photograph of Jane and just be, how could you do this? So that little piece, that little snippet was really wonderful for me, for my story. And then the other thing that really shocked me was that Sergeant never sold Madame X until 1916. He kept it sort of under wraps in his studio. I think he might have displayed it once in a small setting, but because it had created such a scandal, he waited and waited. But that was a very long time to wait. So we're talking about 1883 until 1916. Mm-hmm. He keeps the painting in his studio, and he doesn't sell it. But then the year that Amélie Gautreau and Edward Darley Boit die, which is 1915, he sells it immediately in January of 1916. So there again, it fit perfectly into my story, because, he wouldn't want to have that on public display if the people who would really be most bothered by it were still alive. So, those are the kind of things that I just went, so great.
When did he fix the strap, though? He did redo.
He did that right away. As soon as he got it from the Paris Salon, he repainted the strap. And that's the picture that hangs in the Met, is the repainted strap.
It doesn't look that daring now, does it?
Doesn't at all. But I don't know, if you go on my website, I have on there the picture of the painting as it was originally, and then the picture as it was repainted, strap, back up in place. And it really doesn't look as daring.
No.
But if you see it with the fallen strap, it is. There's just something very, very provocative about it. And I don't know.
How lucky we are that we have that prior to being altered version of it. How did that come to be? Is it a photograph of it?
Someone probably created that, just like with what do you call it? You can do that on Photoshop. You can just create that the way it would have looked if it had in the original form. Because unless someone took a photograph of it when it was in the Paris Salon, that's a possibility. I don't know.
That's what I was wondering.
Not even Graham?
Would have been.
Graham took it.
Yeah, took it.
Sarah, I have a completely different question. We've learned so much about your art history and the way that you've incorporated it, and I admire the book very much and enjoyed it very much. And I have a granddaughter who is turning 15 tomorrow. So I was relating as much to what you were talking about, adolescent girls and the onset of their period and their physical problems and the brace and all of those things, which I think you took on so much in this book and handled it so beautifully and honestly. I also, when I finished the book, I had this difficult reaction, and I don't know how to articulate it much better, but doing a young adult book that deals so much with pediatric pornography was a little disturbing to me, considering that you're aiming for young adult children who are turning on television and seeing everything and hearing every word that possibly could be pornographic and seeing things anyway. But I thought it was very gutsy to incorporate that and to make it so omnipresent and to make it so that the Veronica warns. I love that part, that she warns the girls and she follows him, in the streets of Paris to the bleaker areas. So I'd like you to just comment on that, and have you had any problems with that, or how would you present that to a young adult who was reading it, or bring it up and discuss it with a young adult who you might want to recommend the book to?
Well, I have actually presented it to a lot of young adults, and they have enjoyed the book. They have no problem whatsoever with the sexual predator aspects of it. I mean, kids these days are pretty savvy, but also remember, this is not very graphic. This is just, we're preventing abuse here. we're not witnessing abuse. And the only time it gets a little edgy, I guess, is when they find the naked pictures of the girls in the book about Lewis Carroll, Charles Jodson. That was kind of shocking. And by the way, those pictures, or at least one of them, is also on my website. So you can see for yourself how shocking that picture is, the photograph that Lewis Carroll took of the girl. But I've been very encouraged because I've read some articles. There was a really good one in the New York Times talking about how, sexual predation is a fact of life. And if you can present literature that would help a kid to identify what it would be, for example, what grooming is like, so they could be on the lookout for that kind of behavior if it ever came their way. And they could say, that's not for me. I'm out of here. So to present that as a sort of a cautionary tale, let's put it that way.
I think that's terrific. I mean, I've worked in a lot of educational facilities and don't talk to strangers and
right.
Whole thing. And I've written music about all of these things as well. And I just wondered what your take was on it. And I thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed the book twice.
Good. Well, it's very interesting. I had a letter recently, a long email from a high school friend of mine that I've kept in touch with. And she read the book and she brought up this incident from her own life that was very similar. I won't go into all the details, but something that was a predation kind of a situation. And she talked about the fact that she was so flattered by the attention from this incredibly inappropriate attention from this older gentleman. And she was flattered. And that's so often the case. I mean, it was true of Victoria's mother when she was approached by the same creep in her young life. She was just so flattered to be paid attention to and be told she was beautiful. So letting people know that that's what happens, and you don't have to feel that if you're the child, you are not at fault. And that's the important thing, to make sure that they don't feel that they created that situation or that they should feel ashamed. That's the other piece of this that I wanted to convey, is to help other victims to not feel like they had done this to themselves or had created the situation that led to this. So
thank you.
We've talked a lot about the historical aspects of the book, which were really interesting, but one of the things I really enjoyed about the book as well was the evolving friendship between Victoria and Hilary, and the two very different families. And I'm kind of curious, you talked about your process for researching the history, but simultaneously, you also had to have a process for developing these characters in the present. I'm wondering what you can tell us about, were there people in your life that you modeled these characters after? And when did you decide that you needed the friendship, or you needed to incorporate Hilary, and you developed that friendship? And there's a lot in the present. I'd love to hear any of your inspiration or your process, or when you decided that you needed to have the second family, which was Hilary's family.
Well, I knew that she needed a friend. I mean, that was kind of her basic issue. Victoria's real issue was that she was very, very isolated and alone. And, she had a kindly dad, but he was a little bit distant, and her mother was just freaking out all the time and very controlling. And she had lost her best friend. She'd moved away, and they'd kind of gone their separate ways for a while. So she really, really, really needed a friend. So that was kind of a given. I knew she was going to have a friend. And Hilary just kind of emerged as a character. I don't know. I wanted her to be kind of very smart and, full of information, but also kind of goofy and a little bit homely, and, different than Victoria in all the ways possible, so that Victoria could learn from her, because she did need to learn from. She needed to learn a lot of things. So, and I have no personal experience with that kind of very upper class upbringing. My family was not like that at all. We were probably more like Hilary's family growing up. I did come from a family of 4 sisters. So I could relate to the 4 Boit girls. I had a sister that I was intensely close to. She died in 2019, and I'm still grieving. And then I have 2 other sisters that I'm not as close to. So I guess there were some similarities there too. So I kind of see Mary Louisa and Julia. So I would be Julia, and my older sister who died would be Mary Louisa.
And here we are right after Martin Luther King Day, which is also in your book.
Yes, exactly. 1963. Well, the reason it had to be in the 60s, initially I was thinking of doing a contemporary story, but and then she would time travel back. But because the idea to have Clifford Graham abuse not only the Boit sisters, but also Victoria's mother. By the way, that idea was my son's idea. When I say it takes a village, he was the one that came up with it. I thought it was just so brilliant. And he also was the one who gave me all these great tips on time travel, because he reads that kind of stuff all the time. But, so it had to be in the 60s, because otherwise, Clifford Graham would be way too old. So the timing worked to put her in the 60s. And then it became just so much fun because I was that age in 1963. So I could just pull it right out of my own experience in terms of, Martin Luther King and everything that was going on then, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and being in love with JFK. And I mean, that was just straight out of my own teenage years. So, and even the clothes, that was good too. So it made it a lot easier for me to write about that because it was my own time period.
What about James?
Excuse me?
What about James? How did James emerge? That Hilary having this brother who...
Oh, well, I thought it would be good to find a contemporary character who was gay, because it would help me to bring out some stuff about Sargent being gay and the ability to accept that and to be okay with that. you know, in 1963, nobody talked about anybody being gay. It was just,
right.
You know, didn't talk about it. I had absolutely no experience of that when I was that age. So, but, you know, nowadays it's something that kids are just completely comfortable with and talk about all the time. So I thought, because I'm going to be presenting this to a contemporary audience, it would be helpful for them to learn some of the, you know, how this whole thing evolved and what it was like back then. And how far we've come in those terms, at least. And in the women's lib issues too, were also something I thought would be interesting for kids of today to realize how, you know, the fact that we never could wear pants. We just didn't. I mean, we could only wear pants on the weekend or if we were going to play sports, or we never wore them to school. We didn't wear them to parties. It was just not done. So that was, I mean, it was fun to bring up some of that stuff.
I thought you did a great job with the language around James' sexuality, because it was much more awkward, mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
I think kids today would talk about that in a more knowledgeable and sophisticated way. And
They'd be completely accepting, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just no big deal. You know?
and you were very conscious of that.
Yeah.
And I could tell a lot of thought went into how you would craft that language about that conversation back in 1963 being very different than it would be today.
And I talked to some of my gay friends about that and got some pointers. You know, I wanted them to say, how does this feel? Is this okay? And they were helpful. So
yeah.
And then the whole thing about the Catholic Church, you know, and their reaction to someone being gay, that added an extra wrinkle. So
right.
That was one of the things I most enjoyed about the book, was how easy it all felt. Really, you know, that period you wrote about it with such ease and comfort. It rang really true.
Oh, good.
And we've all read stuff that doesn't, all of us here I know, have read stuff said in those periods that you think the tone is off, it doesn't ring true. And one of the things I liked most about your book was how very true it all rang true.
Good. Thank you.
Made me really appreciate it.
Good.
And I don't know you, and I don't know, I mean, I've just joined the group. So
yeah,
I'm listening to everybody saying, well, you're their friend, blah, blah. Well, I'm that reader out there that doesn't know you, that's going, oh man, that's good.
I think something that's so gratifying to me is that all of you read this book and enjoyed it, and you're all grown-ups. You know, it's like, I meant it for kids, but I'm thrilled that so many grown-ups are reading it and enjoying it. That's really wonderful. Though, I mean, I know there are many people of our age and, you know, adults who read young adult fiction and really love it. But
well,
Sarah, that was actually a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, I'm hoping that our teen book group picks it up. They're getting started, I think, in February or March. And so it's one of my recommendations to our youth services librarian to put this on their list. And maybe you'd be willing to come and speak.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. I've talked to some classes. I talked to some 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes, and I can tell you, they loved it. They ate it up. You know, they had all kinds of wonderful questions, and they all wanted to read it. So it's really fun to talk to kids. It really is. So I would love to do that.
I would actually love to be in a multi-age discussion like that. That would be very interesting. I don't know if the kids would like it, but
well, you know, I know there are these mother-daughter book groups. I've heard of this. I haven't actually come across one, but I've certainly heard about it. And I thought this might be a fun,
yes, oh, definitely,
fun book for that. And I heard about this young man that I asked to help me with my website. He's like 26 years old and totally adorable and really, really great. And he shared the book with his sister, who leads a group, sort of a coming of age group with 12-year-olds. And it's kind of helping girls go through that difficult process. And she was excited about sharing the book with them because she thought it would be good for them. So anyway, that's what I'm really hoping for with this. So
I think you do a good job at portraying also the loneliness on all levels.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria's really lonely. She doesn't have any friends at her school, and she doesn't get along with her mother. She wouldn't like being in a book group with her mother. Maybe.
Oh, no. No, not that mother.
And then the mother in the Boit mothers has an excuse of being pregnant and not, but she's not very nurturing.
No, she's not a good mother either.
And they don't the children, except for Louisa and Julia, they interact, but it's not enough. Yeah. They're sort of all, so none of them got married because they didn't learn probably real well how to give and take. They just avoided each other.
Well, Mary Louisa and Julia lived together for their entire life. They were always very, very close. And their father, the woman that was the mother of the four girls, died. Louise, she was also Mary Louisa. She died when Mary Louisa was 20. So they were still very young. And then the father remarried, and he had a young wife who was the same age as Florence, which is a little awkward. But she managed to give birth to a couple, I think 2 boys, and then she died also. So here we have this family with these 4 daughters, these 2 little boys, and this dad, and no moms.
Yeah.
But the dad turned out to be a pretty good dad. He was very supportive of his girls and also of his sons, his younger sons. And the sons went ahead and got married and had a bunch of kids. So Julia, in her older age, was able to be an auntie. And so that was good. She had the companionship of these children of her or I guess they would be her half brothers. So that was good. That was a good.
I have to confess, I had a book of cards for years, and one of them from the museum, from the Met, probably. One of them was Julia. It didn't show the whole thing.
Julia, yeah.
I never wanted to use that card because to me she looks dour. Now, after reading your book, I looked at her again and I liked the way she looked more, but she just looked so sad to me.
The little girl, the littlest you're talking about?
Yeah. And they only had her on this card. So I didn't know that it was part of a major painting. I just thought, well, who do I send this to? She looks so sad.
Well, they do look kind of sad in the painting. I think that, that's part of the thing that draws you in. You want to say, what's wrong? What's going on? So anyway, hey, I have to say hi to Maureen. She's down there in the dark. She's lurking. Hi, Maureen. She's also muted, so we can't hear from her.
What's her last name?
Darnell. Maureen worked for many, many years at the San Anselmo Library. God knows many years. She and I and Renee all worked together. So
yeah, it's good to see Renee.
Thanks. I'm curious, Sarah, what the granddaughters think about this book, and the grandsons too. But,
the grandsons have not read it.
No.
They're into science fiction and fantasy, just like their dad. They won't read it. I think they think it's a girl's book. But my oldest granddaughter, Saya, read it and really liked it. And she was a huge help because she and her friends formed this little advice group for me. They all read the book, and then I brought them together and bought them tea and scones at Fat Apples, and we sat around and talked about it. And they gave me, this was sort of, fairly early on in the process. I had the book mostly worked out, but there were a lot of elements that needed to be included, and they came up with such wonderful ideas for me. So that was great. Saya's now 17, so she's sort of aged out, but her sister Lila was 13 when I said to her, and she's not a huge reader. I said, aren't you going to read my book? And she said, well, I'll listen to the audio. And I said, well, I don't have an audio yet, but how about I read it to you? And this was at the beginning of summer, so she had a lot of free time. And so we made this arrangement. I came over. I mean, I was there a lot anyway. And I read to her at lunchtime, and she has a little bit of ADD, so she needs to multitask. So she actually put on her roller skates and she would roller skate around the living room, or not the living room, the kitchen and the dining room while I read. And then after a while, she'd start to fix her lunch, and then she'd, make this wonderful lunch, and then she'd sit there and eat it. So she was busy doing all kinds of things while I was reading to her. But she took it all in. She heard every word. I mean, that's what they can do. They can do many things at once, and
that was a true test of a young adult book, for sure.
She really liked it, and she, when I asked her questions about it, she understood every bit of it, and she said it's great. You
may have said this in the beginning, but why did you choose to make it YA?
That's just what I write. The other book I wrote that didn't get published was also YA. It was also about a young teen. I don't know. I think it's because I have really very strong memories of that time. It wasn't that I was deliriously happy or anything. I was probably kind of miserable, but I really remember what it was like. And it's a very fascinating time to me, that coming of age. If you look at the epigraph at the beginning of the book, let me just get it and read it to you.
It's 38.
So this is from Henry James, and it says, he perceived that it was never fixed, never arrested, that ignorance, at the instant one touched it, was already flushing faintly into knowledge, that there was nothing that at a given moment you could say a clever child didn't know. And that, I just love that, because that idea of how children move from complete innocence into knowledge, whenever that takes place, is a fascinating thing to me. So,
well, the young adult, as Nancy brought up, if you've read young adult or worked with, any type of literature for young adults, it's extremely sophisticated.
Yeah.
And almost, it's just amazing, the writers that write young adult novels. And I think we see with this book too, it's very sophisticated. And yet that's what the teens want. That's what they want. That's where to meet them. And I think this book did a great job.
Thank you. You'd never want to talk down to them, that's for sure. No. You assume that they have incredibly good brains and they know what you're talking about, and they do. So.
And they might be very resistant to going to a museum or talking about the history of art, but you don't give them a choice. You open the first page and you leap right into the picture yourself. Yeah. So congratulations, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sarah, I have a very specific question that came up in the book and again in this discussion, so I'm being prompted to ask the question. And that is, when you meet with girls these days, are they familiar with the term grooming?
I don't know. I think that, all this stuff about Jeffrey Epstein and his girlfriend who just got put into jail or is about to be put into jail. I mean, how can they avoid learning about these things? They're everywhere. They're in the news. And I think the more that you can educate, this is my whole premise, the more you can educate a young person about this kind of thing without terrifying them.
Exactly.
The more they're going to
I would hope that they would know the term grooming, because it would mean to me that it's in their conversation.
Yeah.
And that's where I think sometimes where we don't know how much is in their day-to-day life of consciousness. They're so sophisticated, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just wondering how much there is a real effort to educate them or in their sophistication. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess I think that there are some parents who probably try to protect their kids, like the way Victoria's mother tried to protect her, which I think is the wrong thing to do. And then there are other parents who just kind of try to talk to their kids about stuff. And things happen in kids' lives. They might meet someone who they think is a little creepy, and they talk about that. They'll say, "Oh, he was creepy," and they know what they're talking about. They know exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about, they're not using the language perhaps of grooming or sexual predation, but they know creepy when they see it, and the smart ones do. The ones who haven't been completely isolated and protected. So. I mean, I think the more that you get your street smarts, the better off you are.
Yeah.
And you don't protect kids. You let them go out in the world. I mean, my 17-year-old granddaughter goes all over the place and takes buses and BART and, goes out in the world. And she is very, very comfortable and smart about how she does that. And she's not afraid. So that's good. I like that.
Speaking of your 17-year-old granddaughter, Saya.
Yeah.
Why do you think she's aged out of this book? I mean, I don't feel aged out.
No, I mean, she read it when she was 14.
Okay.
Oh, she loved it then. I think she actually did read it again recently. I shouldn't have said she aged out of it. When it came out as a published book, she read it again. And she's a fan, she likes it. So
I'm curious about the whole genre of young adult and why the distinction. I mean, this is a work of literature that appeals to all ages. I'd like to understand a little bit more about that because I haven't thought about YA a lot.
Why don't we ask the librarians in the group here? I think they could speak to this. Linda, what is your thought about that?
Yeah, a lot of young adult literature tends to have themes that appeal to young adults. So a lot of the things in Sarah's book are right down that alley, struggles with friendships in school, right? So that's not something that we as adults experience in our day-to-day. Issues with body image that are, very centered on puberty and change of life, like when Victoria is concerned about not having her period and, she's behind, issues with, perhaps teachers and certainly issues with parents, you don't understand me, you're this and you're that. So a lot of those topics, while adults are very comfortable reading about those, these books have a special resonance with younger people, with these young adults. And it tends to be mostly middle school or junior high, aged students. And a lot of times, it's cathartic and therapeutic because you may be dealing with something like that, or your friends might be, or you are not, but it feels really good to read about how other young people resolve issues in their own lives. Like, me as a 13-year-old girl, I might not be dealing with that, but maybe I know, or I've heard of someone in my high school that's dealing with a particular issue. And here I can read about it. I can almost live vicariously. Maybe it's drug use or it's abuse, other kinds of abuse. And I can read about it and maybe, as Sarah was just saying, gain some street smarts. Maybe the word grooming is used by a teacher in one of these books, and suddenly I start putting all of those pieces together. So again, as adults, we can read these and they're very, it can be very interesting and we enjoy them, but I think they hold a special place for young people. And provide something very unique and special for young people.
It's definitely a new genre in the last 35 years, or more. There was not a young adult section at the San Anselmo Library until, oh gosh, Sarah, what do you think? I think we didn't get that section over there where the new books were until probably the early 90s.
Yeah.
the books that I read, fiction books that I read as a teenager at the San Anselmo Library, were adult books. And they dealt with adult subjects from an adult point of view. Sometimes there were, younger people in the books, but when you go to the young adult section, it's from the young person's point of view mostly, and it's been a real boom to young readers, to have this type of thing that addresses these hard subjects you may not want to talk to your parents about, or a teacher, or anybody else. May not even want to talk to friends about it, but you can read about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been, I did a little bit of the young adult, of the teen groups, and they were really, really fantastic books, and the kids loved them.
Mm-hmm. You think about a book like To Kill a Mockingbird. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was not considered a young adult book, but it's perfect. It's just perfect for young adults. Yeah. Or A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I'm thinking about the old books, the classics.
Yeah. Even The Outsiders.
Oh gosh, yes. Right. That was probably the first real young adult book, I think. The Outsiders.
Yeah.
What about Little Women?
Yeah. So anyway, it's a huge market now. I mean, young adult fiction is wildly popular, and it isn't just read by kids. It's read by all kinds of people, and it's very the publishers want it, and the readers want it. So that's good.
Yeah. Place.
I found one of the things that this book did for me, aside from a lot of the things that have already been discussed, it transported me to want to ask myself, what painting would I want to step into?
And that's a great question.
Right? Yeah. And I don't know how many of you had that experience. And I flitted through so many paintings. And I thought it was interesting that the focus on a portrait seemed particularly salient to wanting to pass through a painting and talk to someone on the other side, as opposed to a pastoral or a still life or something. And I landed on passing through the Jan Vermeer, The Girl with the Pearl Earring.
Oh yeah.
Right. There's just so much, that's going on in the background. And I would love to pass through that painting and talk to her and see what was going on. So I don't know if anyone else thought about that or has a sudden inspiration, but I would love to hear about that.
You've given me a wonderful idea.
I was going to ask, I haven't thought about that, Linda, but Sarah, one question I had is, what are you working on next?
Oh, what I'm really working on right now is trying to promote this book, because, pretty much these days you do all your own publicity, and you drum it up, you talk to all your friends, so that's what I'm doing right now. And I've given myself a year to do that. And then I have a plan. I have recently connected with a neighbor across the street. I mean, I've known her for many, many years, but I didn't realize she was a writer. We just sort of serendipitously found out. She saw a copy of my book and she said, "Oh my God, you're a writer. I've written a book." And so we have decided to form a writers group. She's very busy right now because she's actually a professor who's started a second career, basically, of being a novelist. And so she's getting an MFA. So she's doing a distance MFA. And when she finishes, which will be next summer, which sort of coincides with my end of my year of promoting this book, I plan to join with her. And I think what I might do is bring out that book that I had written earlier, which I still really like, and work on that. And we'll see where it goes. So that's my plan. It's really good to have a writer's group, though, when you're embarked on a project, and it's hard. It's hard to find compatible people. So I was lucky to find Julia and Marianne. And then they both died. And then I felt like I was the kiss of death. You know, no one would want to be in a book group with me. Oh. That was very tragic. So
it looked like Mona, you had your hand up.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've been in a writing group just now, a little bit of a throat catch, and I wrote different kind of words, all different kinds, different times in my life, and I find that there's not a lot of writing that goes on in writing groups. And I don't understand that why I feel like some people write, it's just really, writing is really hard. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that people understand that. They join a writing group and they think they're just going to be a writer. And I'm right now I have this thing, I'm doing this thing with the chicken house and how I'm picking out the eggs. I'm a young kid. I'm completely stuck. And so I'd be very specific about it. And it's not the chicken picking in my eyes. And that's all I was going to say, but that's all I can say. And where do you take that to? What group do you go with?
You mean how do you find a writers group? Is that what you're saying?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing. I mean, to find someone to work with who where you're compatible. I mean, where you're both kind of at the same level. You're both working on the same types of projects. You like each other's writing. You get along with each other. I mean, that's like getting married, right? It's really hard to find someone who suits all of those needs. So that's why I say, you know, I'm delighted to find this person across the street who just kind of fell into my lap. And then I read her book and I thought, yeah. Is someone waving? Tracy, you're going? Okay.
I'm actually going to say, I was going to mention my writing group.
Oh, good.
We've been together, we think about 15 years. We can't really remember. But I was going to say for people in Marin County, we started out as part of Leslie Keenan at Book Passage, her writing groups. But over time, we found we wanted to be published. She wanted to be more of a muse to people. And we were all concentrating on, we want to be published. Mm-hmm. So very amicably, we said we're going to form our own group, a subgroup of people who want to be published and are going to spend time every month working on that aspect, teaching ourselves, going to things, doing things. How do you get published? Mm-hmm. And for me, we all write different things, completely different things, but good writers give great critique.
That's right.
No matter what they're writing. Mm-hmm. And so I was going to say that it may not be necessary to feel like you're all on sort of the same, like I'm the only children's writer in my group. I write adult things as well, but they exclusively write adult things. But their feedback is fantastic and mine to them, just because I love to read, I love to write, I love to edit. That's what I do, is all very useful. So I've been very fortunate in just, we had more diversity and that worked out. So yeah.
But I think the thing you said about all of you wanting to be published, I think that's what I kind of meant, that you were all on the same page in terms of how the level, you know, where you are, where you want to go. It doesn't matter what you're writing. I agree with that. But,
okay.
But you have to be compatible in your goals. I think that's what I was trying to get at. So
yeah. And we've kept those rules. I mean, if you don't keep your weekly commitment, it costs you $20 in our group.
That's hardcore.
Yeah. So we have this nice thing that when we can travel again, we're going to go on a writing retreat somewhere because we've managed, you know, sometimes we don't make great weekly commitments. And we're like, ah!
And Mona, we did have a writing group that was meeting at the library pre-COVID, of course. And it was a group of 4 women who met regularly. And hopefully that group will reconvene at some point in the near future again. So
that's great.
Keep an eye out for, you know, that in our newsletter.
Great.
Sarah, my name is Sharon Bloom, and I am not in the book group, but I do remember I moved to San Anselmo when you were still at the library, and I do remember you. But I just want to thank you. I have to leave now, but I am so looking forward to reading your book. I haven't read it yet, but I, you know, just listening to everybody's comments, I'm going to go buy it. I'm going to buy it from a local bookseller.
Good.
Yeah. So,
yeah. I know Book Passage has it. Booksmith, I think, has it. And some of the Copperfields have it. So it's out there.
And the other thing about writing, I just wanted to comment is that I have been in writing groups and I'm enjoying writing. And, you know, College of Marin has some classes. And I think workshops, that's how you meet people too. And so, I mean, I just think somehow when you don't know anybody, you have to kind of put your feelers out and find ways. So anyway.
That's right. I agree.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What other comments or thoughts? We are at just about 8:30. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you all. This has been really, really fun. And
great seeing you.
Great.
Come back.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your willingness to join, not in person, but this has been wonderful. Congratulations. I very much enjoyed your book, and I look forward to recommending it to people in the library of all ages. And thank you all for joining this evening, taking time out, and for all your thoughtful comments and questions. I think this has been a very rich discussion, and I feel privileged to be a part of it, and nice to see some faces that has been a long time since I've seen you.
Do we have a book for next time?
We don't. And if the book group would like to stay on for a few minutes, we can winnow that down. But thank you all.
Why don't we do that? Bye-bye, Sarah.
I'm going to say good night to everybody.
Good night, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Excellent book.
Bye.
Nice seeing you. Good read.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Marie.
Bye.
Miss you. Miss you. Oh, well, I miss everybody. No.
All right. So nice to see you all. And thank you. Like I said, so what are you thinking for next month? Anyone?
I was wondering who recommended Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro. It's on the list that you have. Did somebody?
We did read it, but maybe before anyone else. Do you remember, Nancy? We read Never Let Me Go.
You read it already?
It's old. It's really old. Yeah.
Yes, it's been read.
I never read. Well, somebody put it on the list, but if everybody read it already,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, if it's not one that we want to keep on the list, I can remove it.
It's funny. My sister-in-law gave me.
Can somebody do a synopsis of it, please? So can. Sorry. What is it? What's it about? What's it about?
I didn't read it, but somebody else did it. It's about 3 people who meet each other after years of being apart. That's it.
So many years.
Gosh.
I read it years and years ago. But
Who reminded the author? Isn't it the...
wait a minute.
Yeah. I think it's the one about... Well, it's, I thought it was creepy. I'm not going to
Thank you. I don't want to spend my time reading something that's stupid.
It's by
Thank you.
Ishiguro. My sister-in-law gave me a book by him at Christmas with Clara and the Sun, but that's new, and so I don't imagine there would be copies of that. And so we don't usually do books that are not in paperback.
Oh yeah, I remember this one. So Never Let Me Go. As a child, Kathy, now 31 years old, lives at Halisham, a private school in the scenic English countryside, where the children were sheltered from the outside world, brought up to believe that they were special and that their well-being was crucial not only for themselves, but for the society they would eventually enter. She puts this idyllic past behind her, but when two of her Halisham friends come back into her life, she stops resisting the pull of memory.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
It's your girl can be challenging.
Come on, guys. We're all adults. How much time do we have to spend on this stuff?
Excuse me.
So I have a hard time hearing you, Mona. My connection.
I'm sorry. My throat is fucked up. I don't know why. It's it's called TMJ. So it doesn't resonate as it usually does. So I'm just saying that I don't want to spend a lot of time reading things that waste my time. And I think that mail-in sections are like, you just read a synopsis of a book. If I like, think of how do we agree on the kind of content and book we want to read and discuss with each other?
We've usually worked it out pretty well. We just, sometimes we don't all like a book, but we find it, we've done this for years, so we find it meaningful to discuss it. And sometimes you realize that you actually do like a book that you thought you didn't like after listening to other people. I never read this book, but if you all read it already, we can look on the list again. What do you think, Nancy? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I am unfortunately possessed with my health at the moment.
Okay. Oh.
Linda, do you have the list?
That's what I'm trying to find, and I do. I just pulled it up.
It's in your November. It's in your November mailing.
Yeah, I think I pulled up October actually. There's the Overstory by Richard Powell.
No, we read that.
We read it.
Hated it. Take that off. Nancy and I hated it. And
really?
Yeah.
I didn't.
We won the Pulitzer Prize.
And
now we won it. It went into COVID, so we never met. But some of us read it.
Oh, that's right. Yes. About the trees.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to reread that book.
So do you feel like you want to talk about it though, or you just want to leave it?
We did that.
We did it.
We didn't talk about it in this group because COVID happened, but I don't want to talk about it. Nancy, do you want to talk about it? I think Nancy and I were the two that read it.
Well,
that's funny.
A lot of people I know have read Braiding Sweetgrass and loved it. And that's a possibility.
What is it called again?
Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's written by a Native American author. I've got it sitting on my to read stand. And I know a couple people said it was one of those things where
you read a piece and then you stopped and you wanted to go back and read it because it was so beautiful. I don't know if anyone has read it or if Linda has any comments, but
it's still popular. There isn't a wait list